Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time there lived a princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, lips as red as rose, and hair as black as ebony. Snow White's stepmother, the queen, was also very beautiful, but very vain. She owned a magic mirror which always answered truthfully to any question it was asked. The queen would often stand in the front of the mirror, combing her long hair, and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror would sigh, wondering why nobody ever asked questions like, "What is the meaning of life?" But it would reply, "You are the fairest of all." This made the queen very happy. As Snow White grew up, she became even more beautiful. One morning, when the queen asked a question, the mirror replied, a little too cheerfully, "Snow White is the fairest of all." The queen flew into a terrible rage and called her trusted huntsman for her. "I want Snow White gone," she told him. "Take her into the woods and tie her to a tree. She will be eaten by wild animals and never return." The huntsman set off to do as he was told. But when the huntsman took Snow White into the forest, and she happily chatted away and offered to carry his bow for him, he found he could not bring himself to do what the queen had ordered, so he let her go. "Run away as far as you can and never return," he told Snow White. So she ran into the forest and kept running for as long as she could. Just as cold and hunger finally set in, she saw a small cottage in the distance. Finding nobody at home, she gently opened the door and went inside. Inside the cottage, she found a tiny table with 7 very small place settings. In the kitchen, she found bread and water, which she savored while sitting on a tiny chair. The cottage was warm and comfortable, and Snow White was very tired, so she curled up on one of the 7 tiny beds and was soon sleeping soundly. When it was dark outside, the owners of the cottage came home. There were 7 dwarfs who mined in the mountains for gold and silver. The dwarfs carried their candles into the cottage and were very frightened by the giant they found sleeping inside. "What is it?" "A monster." "What should we do?" "Attack it." Wait, said another. "It's just a human girl." The dwarfs all crowded around Snow White to get a closer look. "So it is, silly ass." Snow White awoke with a start to find 7 little men standing around her. She was frightened at first, but quickly realized the dwarfs are very friendly. When Snow White told them the story, they soon became fast friends, and the dwarfs decided that she would stay with them in their cottage. "But you must be very careful," one of the dwarfs warned her. "You might still be in danger from the queen. So don't go out into the woods alone and never ever open the door to a stranger." Back at the castle, the queen, believing that Snow White was no longer a problem, arose the next morning, went to her magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied with a groan, "Snow White is fairest of all." "That foolish huntsman! He can't even be trusted to get rid of the silly little girl. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself." So the jealous queen, who was consumed with anger, decided would not rest until she found where Snow White was hiding. First, the queen began by plastering wanted posters in every town and along every roadside. But the creatures of the forest, who loved Snow White, made it their mission to tear each one down. After receiving no news of Snow White's whereabouts, the queen realized the answer had been right in front of her all along. She stood before her magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, oh so fragile, where was the brat been all this while?" The mirror, feeling somehow alarmed at the queen's angry tone and her ability to smash him into 100 tiny pieces, sadly replied, "Snow White lives with her 7 dwarfs in their cottage in the forest." The queen set to work on an evil plan. Disguising herself as a pheasant woman, she scoured the markets for the biggest, juiciest apples she could find. Then she selected the best apple of the bunch and carefully brushed one side with poison. The queen then placed the apples in a basket and made her way to the dwarf's cottage. Once there, she waited patiently for the dwarfs to go to work. "Apples for sale," called the queen outside the cottage window, remembering the dwarf's warning. Snow White cautiously peered out of the window, and upon seeing delicious apples in a basket, said sadly, "I'm not to let anyone in." "There is no need," replied the queen as she took a large bite from the unpoisoned side of the apple. "Here, try this," she said, and passed the apple through the window. Snow White thought she much rather have her own apple rather than a germy half-eaten one, but not wanting to be rude to the kind old lady, she took the apple and bit into the opposite side. The poison struck immediately and Snow White fell to the floor. Delighted at her success, the queen cackled with laughter all the way back to the castle. As soon as she arrived, she went straight to her magic mirror. This time, in answer to her question, the bored mirror answered, "You are the fairest of all." The queen was very pleased. That evening, the dwarfs found Snow White lying on a cottage floor. Distraught, they tried everything they could think of to wake her up, but nothing worked. The dwarfs wanted her to be at peace, so they made Snow White a white glass casket and took her into the woods, where they could watch her over. Even the animals came to mourn for her. One day, a handsome prince happened by the casket and was instantly mesmerized by the beautiful girl inside. He knew he could not live without being able to look upon her lovely face, so he asked the dwarfs for permission to take her back to his kingdom. The dwarfs agreed to lose Snow White, but glad that she will have a resting place. The prince thanked the dwarfs and began to ready the casket for the long journey. But as he lifted the casket, the piece of poisoned apple was freed from Snow White's mouth, and she was instantly awoke. Snow White and the prince fell madly in love and soon traveled to the prince's kingdom to be married. They lived happily ever after, often returning to the cottage in the forest to visit their favorite friends, the dwarfs. The queen, having believed this whole time that Snow White was gone, stood in front of her magic mirror one day and asked her favorite question. This time the mirror gleefully answered, "Evil queen, who art so vain, Snow White is alive again. She is lovely of heart and face, and has 1,000 times your beauty and grace." And with that, the queen exploded in a puff of green, jealousy-filled smoke, never to be seen again. The end.